Okay, back after that commercial break. Okay, so we're going to talk about society and culture, but also economics. So we put a lot into this little section here. With settlement comes a specialization of labor. I mentioned someone gets to be in charge. Somehow they make the rules. Other people follow, or else. Someone builds the walls around the city. Somebody makes the weapons. Somebody makes the pottery to hold the water. Somebody knows the farming. Someone's the engineer. Someone's the ditch digger. Right? There's a specialization of labor. There's also formation of classes. Some people get wealthy and others don't. There's an accumulation of stuff. How does this happen? Look, frankly, it's generally luck. Okay? Wealthy people today will tell you, I worked hard and I earned everything I got, which actually should be I have, but anyway. No, I mean, for the most part, they inherited it or they got a lucky break. Certainly there's hard work involved, right? But you get a lot of things have to come together. Okay? So I think I mentioned it before, but let's imagine that, you know, your great-great-grandparents were all Mesopotamian, you know, moved into the region and started to farm along the banks of the river. And, you know, my ancestors came a year later and all the good land was taken and they end up in kind of the drier section, maybe upland a little bit in the hills. You know, fast forward a few generations, you're wealthy and I'm poor. That's all it was. Yeah. Poor people work very hard, right? Both in the past and in the present. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we move through history and through the present. Specialization of labor then. People began to specialize as we do today. If I could, you know, ask you what your majors are, maybe I will sometime in a discussion board. You know, you'll see a lot of different things, right? Because we all rely upon one another in a specialization of labor. I don't think everyone out there is going to be a history major, right? There just aren't enough jobs to do so, right? We need doctors and lawyers and business people and teachers and, you know, fathers and mothers and people of a variety of backgrounds. So, you know, kind of pursue what you feel passionate about. Some people were metallurgists, so they made bronze out of copper and tin, weapons and plows. We had the wheel invented in Mesopotamia. Theory is that it came out of pottery. Like if you've ever done pottery, you know, spinning a potter's wheel, they had to make vessels to hold the water. Iron enters the region about 3,000 years ago. There's shipbuilding, so we'll look at a map in a moment where they could take to the so-called Persian Gulf. Trade networks. Trade spreads ideas, right? Trade spreads ideas. This area was fairly poor in metals. They could grow a lot of food, but they didn't have the metals. They didn't have the bronze they needed. They had to get that from far away, right? That's kind of like Afghanistan. So when you trade things, you trade ideas. And I can just imagine somebody with food, you know, I've got a bunch of food and a wagon pulled by a donkey, and you have the copper, and you need food, and we're going to exchange. And I've got this big wet slab of clay, and I'm pushing shapes into it. It's a pad. It's a pad of clay. And you're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm writing a receipt. And like, so this idea called writing begins to spread. And someone in your society, you know, wants to somehow, for my people in Mesopotamia, learn how to read and write. There were actually special schools for that. It tended to be the sons of very wealthy who could afford these private schools. Okay, no public schools in this area. Well, not for a long time, believe me. So, ideas spread. So too did disease, as we're kind of learning today, right? In an era of rapid transit, travel technology, diseases can spread pretty rapidly along with ideas. So, who do we have in this region? We have the Hammurabi in kind of orange here. People called the Assyrians, who came from the north. Nineveh actually came from here. And people called the Hittites. The Hittites came from like off the map, okay? Their ancestors were part of an Indo-European movement, and they knew how to make iron. Rusty rocks smashed together, high heat, begin to melt, okay? Pound it and heat it and pound it, and I don't even know how to make iron myself, and here I am, you know, 3,000 some years later. But iron is good, okay? Really strong iron, purified iron, steel is even better. So they do this technologies. Keep in mind we also have Egypt, kind of contemporaneous. There is a word we use in history. By contemporary, we just mean like what's going on today in 2020. Contemporaneous means what's happening at the same time in the past. Okay? So as we have Hammurabi, you know, in Babylon, we have, I can't remember what pharaoh, it doesn't matter, right? In charge in Egypt. These are our contemporaneous societies. And they're in contact with one another. Okay? Different forms of writing, different ways of ruling, different beliefs, but nonetheless trading with one another. How do we know? Well, there's records of that. Plus there's, Mesopotamian goods that are over here and Egyptian goods over there. Society is both stratified, poor, enslaved people, poor, middle, wealthy rulers, okay, on the ladder, and it's also patriarchal. Patriarchal, when you see patriarchal, just think pa, okay? The males are in charge. How? Probably through military conquest, okay? Generally the males are in charge in these early societies. That's not always been the case worldwide, okay? There have also been matriarchal societies, even matriarchal societies that have waged war, pretty effectively, in fact, okay? But generally speaking, in Mesopotamia, it was patriarchal. And once the men got in charge, they created a culture to keep men in charge, okay? Called it a patriarchy. So, men controlled the family, Pa controlled the family. Rulers were hereditary, okay? When the king died, one of his sons, the eldest generally, becomes the next ruler. The next group down on the ladder were the nobles. These were the big landlords, the big landowners. They were quite wealthy, not necessarily with money. Many of these sites really didn't have money, okay? So, your economy was based on a barter system. Wealth was really the amount of land you had and the number of people you had working. Okay? So the nobles these are your landlords, okay? And they're going to have a lot of power well into the modern era, okay? Well into like the late 18th century, the late 1700s. I think plantation owners in this country. Not an official nobility, no, we didn't officially start a nobility. Sometimes it seems we're creeping toward it with certain families, but officially we don't. Because nobles would have all types of privileges under the law, like generally not paying taxes. What else? I'm not sure about Mesopotamia, but privileges, they could wear certain types of clothing. They would get the best jobs in the government, in the religion, in the army. Okay, so the nobles, because they were born into this upper class. Okay, so you're born into the nobility. Well, in this era, you got to be a priest, which was probably a cushy job if you think about it back then. Maybe not today, right? But back then, commoners, common people. These are people are a force for history. This is like you and I, right? The so-called uncommon common people. Okay? Working stiffs. And then at the bottom of society were people who were enslaved. Okay? These were prisoners of war, people convicted of a crime, people had fallen into debt. Dude, you owe me $10,000. You can't pay me off. You're going to work for me for 10 years. And then you go free. And by the way, your kids aren't enslaved. Why do I care? That wouldn't be fair. Slavery in this era, and really throughout most of human history, is not based upon skin tone. It's an unfortunate, often stage in life. Generally, enslaved people until the 1600s did not, their children were not considered slaves. Okay? You were captured in war, instead of killing you, you're going to work for us. There were people enslaved to become tutors, right? Teachers. We're not going to kill you because you're smart, you can tutor my children. Okay? Look, it wasn't cushy, you weren't free, but you weren't worked to death, as we will see later in this supposedly more advanced era of history, after 1600. People are worked to death, and their children and children's children, etc., are considered slaves and are denigrated as human beings. So this is slavery without racism. Racism is a modern construction. Racism arose in the 1600s to justify capitalism's slavery. Okay? When people of specific skin tone and geographic area, or areas, I guess I could say, native peoples of the Americas as well as people of African origin, were enslaved and denigrated as somehow inferior. So, racism is in the news, thankfully, a lot right now. Thankfully because people are discussing it, but rarely is discussed where did it come from. Like, how could this actually make sense? What does this mean? It justified slavery, okay? And really the hope is that if racism is something constructed, like, oh, we just made that up, right? We just made this up to justify profit making off of human beings. We can unmake it up, right? So people talk a lot about deconstructing racism or anti-racism. Well, this is how we do it, right? History is a great tool in that respect. I'm going to check the camera again. Don't take a commercial break yet. I'll tell you how many minutes we have left in this segment here. I'm actually speaking fairly quickly here. Okay, so got a little bit of time left. Okay. Let's move into our cultural discussion for a moment in Mesopotamia. So we enter the era called history when we have writing. And the writing looked like this. It looks like the essays I used to give my students. They were illegible. I couldn't read them. Right? That's probably the one thing I like about Blackboard is people have to actually type their essays and I can read them. Right? They're not writing them in class anymore. In fact, look, a lot of you don't even have that skill. Right? I mean, when's the last time you had to write anything more than just a couple of lines? It's really tough. We've lost some of that fine motor skill. Anyway, they weren't really writing. They were taking a stylus, okay, and pushing into like clay. These are abstract symbols. Writing started off with pictographs. Think like stick figures. But it's really tough to convey abstract ideas with just stick figures, right? Stick figures. I love my daughter. I mean, how do you write that? Little girl figure, big man figure, heart, I don't know. It's kind of tough, okay? So these pictographs became more ideographic. We began to press them, by the way. You left-handed people can blame the Mesopotamians. They used to press them from left to right, so they didn't, to do it the other way, you'd smudge things, so it's their fault that we write from the left margin to the right. It's called cuneiform. There were schools to teach people how to write, but again, private schools for men only, and they were really expensive. But if you got a job as a scribe, if you could tell me something and press it down, write it down, you were set, man. This was a cushy job, okay? You could rent yourself out. You could work for the temple, or the religion. You could work for the government. You could work for business people. Wanted to know how to read or write, but didn't. So. Education led to a good job. These schools, the edubas as they were called, these schools also began to teach astronomy. Yeah, agricultural people need to know when to plant and when to harvest. Okay, you can't just guess at this stuff. So the Mesopotamians were pretty adept at astronomy. I mean, with the naked eye, they could see a whole lot more than you and I can see tonight. Tonight? Well, that makes sense. Yeah, these days in the night sky. Okay, because we have so much light pollution and other pollution, they could actually see a lot more. And they, frankly, knew a lot more about astronomy than I do. I mean, yes, I know how many planets there are. Well, is there 9 or 8? We keep changing that. But, they knew a lot more about the constellations, like where they should be, different times of the year. I know the Big Dipper is like over there right now, but, what's the moon up tonight or not? I don't know. Okay? So with this modern era, we've kind of lost some of our touch with nature. Right? They're also really adept mathematicians. These are the people we can perhaps blame for the 12 hours in half a day, the 24 hours in a day. They base their mathematics on a unit of 6. So 6, 12, 24. Why are there 360 degrees in a circle? If I was inventing this, I probably would have made 100, but no, they made 360. Why? I don't know. Because they were basing it on a unit of 12. Okay? And that sticks. You still have that today. Literature. When they weren't writing like receipts for who brought the grain to the temple, okay, O'Brien brought in 3 bushels of wheat, he paid for the year. They began to write fiction. Okay? The Epic of Gilgamesh is just a great epic story. There's an excerpt in your textbook. Read it sometime. About Gilgamesh, who was this proud, really narcissistic ruler of Ur, a city-state, and he was really handsome and really buff, and he'd steal everyone's girlfriend, and guys would get mad at him, and fathers would get mad at him, and they pleaded to the gods, and like, yeah, we're gonna teach this guy a lesson. So they created another man who was like equally handsome and buff and arrogant, and they go, oh, these guys are gonna fight, but they became best friends. And then the gods got really mad because this other dude, what's the name, Akindu, spurn one of the goddesses who wanted to get with him, and he dies, right? And Gilgamesh, my best friend, the only guy who ever loved me and understood me, died. And he pulls out his hair and he goes on a quest for eternal life, eternal youth. And he learns of a story of a man who actually saved humanity when the gods got mad at humanity and sent a great flood to flush us all away because we're so bad and noisy. But Ea, the god of wisdom, warned this guy, build a boat, dude, build a boat and put all the creatures on it and save yourself. And Ea does. And look, if you lived in a riverine civilization, or if you live like in Louisiana, I mean, think about where people live and how flooding can become such a great fear, and how, if the Tigris or Euphrates floods, that's your whole world. You live in a mud brick home. That is your world, okay? So these flood stories arise from these early civilizations. Anyway, the gods kind of have second thoughts, like maybe we shouldn't have flushed everyone away. And Ea's like, you did it because I saved this dude and his family. And they're like, oh Ea, you're smart, we'll make you the god of wisdom, and we'll give this guy, Noah, they gave him another name, what was it, Utnapishtim, we'll give this guy the tree of eternal youth. So he gets off the boat, and he gets this tree of eternal youth, and he and his family go live in the Garden of Eden happily ever after. Well, Gilgamesh, long story, right, goes to find him and brings the tree back, like, awesome, I'm going to be young forever, and I'm going to give it to those men back in my hometown who don't like me anymore. They'll like me and whatever. They'll be welcome back home. And he lays down in a pool of water, like, oh, these adventures, and finally I'm done. And a snake stole it away. Sorry, people, you don't get the tree of eternal youth. You get Botox and, I don't know, whatever, liposuction, this other stuff. Right? We don't get that, right? So this is like, it's not supposed to be a funny story. It's really about love and loss and courage and friendship, and like, people were expressing these emotions that we have. Like, why do we get old and die? I mean, why do we die young? It's even worse, right? 4,000, 5,000 years ago. Okay, so good story to read sometime. It's all available for free online. And by the way, if you want that flood story, yes, it's echoed in the Old Testament later on. Okay, of course, I just said the Semites. The ancestors to Jewish people were living in this area. Of course you're going to pick up on some of these stories, right? It's no surprise that it ends up in the Bible in a different form. That's called the Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish. When on high, kind of the creation story of Mesopotamia. So that stuff's all free, you can get out of it. Where we're going to pick up next time is with the ancestors to the Judeans, the Jewish faith, and their neighbors in Phoenicia. So we're going to move from way up in Mesopotamia. I guess you go up the rivers until you get to the Eastern Mediterranean. We're going to talk about the kingdom of Israel, Judah, and Phoenicia next time. Okay, so that'll be it for this lecture. This lecture. I'm kind of wishing the election was over, I guess. Please email me or call me if you have any questions, all right? Keep up with the reading. Please read before these. I guess you can watch these, read, and watch these again. It's just the technology allows that. But typically, I'm doing this quickly, right? If you're only getting it from the videos, you're not getting it. It's just not possible, okay? You need to kind of sow the field before I throw these seeds at you, right? Whatever type of metaphor you want to use. You've got to do the reading, and I would really recommend a couple things, because I have a few minutes to squeeze this in. So, chapter 2, someone said, well, can I get the PowerPoints? And I'm like, the history department doesn't give out the PowerPoints. We really actually like people to engage a bit. But here are the PowerPoints, actually, okay? At least what I use. When I made these PowerPoints, I just retyped this stuff. Okay? It's just the front piece. So the second page of every chapter has the outline for the chapter. I'm just adding images, maps, stuff that's already in your chapter, right? So these YouTube lectures follow the outline of the chapter. I suppose I could, give you a whole 50 minutes on Hammurabi's law code, but like, I just don't think that's fair, although it's probably more interesting, right? For our survey courses, we generally structure them according to the book, so we spend a lot of time selecting the book. So the lecture